إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله تعالى من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله تعالى فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، واشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، واشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد، يقول الله تبارك وتعالى: يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. My dear respected brothers, sisters, elders, and youngsters in Islam, as this is my second last khutbah before I leave, I wanted to convey 3 messages before I leave. The scholars of Islam, if I could ask the young kids in the back to stop playing. The scholars in Islam, they say that there are 2 important times when advice should be given. The first is when one leaves for another land, he should give advice to the people before his departure. And the second is when a person leaves this world for the next, he should give advice to the people before his final breath, like the Prophet ﷺ did. My 3 messages have to do with the work that I have focused on for the last 2 years. The first of these is youth and understanding them. Number 2 is unity and of the community and trying to fix past grudges. And number 3 is progression and growth. Today, I'm just going to talk about the first thing, which is youth and understanding them. And in the following week, I'll talk about the unity of the community, trying to fix past grudges, and moving forward and progressing and growing. One of the biggest mistakes when understanding the youth that most parents fail, most community members fail, most uncles and aunties fail, is that they compare our youth with the youth that surrounded the Prophet ﷺ. They say to their sons and daughters that, why can't you be like Abdullah ibn Abbas? Why can't you be like Zayd ibn Thabit, who wrote the Quran when he was at the age of 14? Why can't you be like these people? But the reality is that Zayd ibn Thabit, Abdullah ibn Abbas, and all of these people were exceptions in their own time, in their own era amongst the Sahaba. Today we compare our leaders of the Muslim world with Umar radiallahu anhu, and we find that the leaders of today lack the justice of Umar. But you have to understand the justice of Umar was an exception even in his time, that many of the Sahaba could not reach his level. And so to compare our children with the people of the past is incorrect. This is why Imam al-Tahawi rahimahullah, the great Imam Ibn Abidin rahimahullah, one of the great scholars of the Hanafi school of law, he used to say that if you brought a person who knew all of the proofs of the world, he knew all of the schools of law, he knew all of the madhahib, that person still does not have the right to give fatwa unless he knows the culture and the customs of the people and their problems. Only at that point can he actually address any issue. And so the problems of the youth in America, our kids here, differ from the problems of those that are in the United Kingdom, those that are in Palestine, those that are in Pakistan, in Turkey, in Saudi, and so on and so forth. The doctor does not give the same medicine to all his patients. We don't treat all kids the same. So inshallah, to prove my point, I'm going to give you 5 points to understand. And from there, you'll start to begin to understand your kids. This topic, it requires 15, 20, 30 lectures. But the reality is we only have 1. So what's the first point? We have to understand the haqiqatul insan. We have to understand the reality of the human being. What exactly is the human being? Many of us, when we look at the youth, we say, oh, talk to the youth about smoking. Talk to the youth about wasting their time playing video games. Talk to the youth about relationships and so on and so forth. But the reality is all of these are issues that are a result of an actual problem. They're not the problem in the first place. I'll explain what I mean. A person has a problem. A person has a difficulty in their life. Somebody is going through some hardship. And because of that, they smoke. Because of that, they drink. Because of that, they engage in illicit relationships. Why? Because there was a problem before this actual thing. And so these are all the result. If a parent finds out that their kid is smoking, they believe that it is the biggest cause of their child's failure. But the reality is that this smoking is a result of another thing that's happening in your child's life. It's a result of something else happening. And yes, smoking is a problem. Yes, illicit relations are a problem. Yes, all of these are a problem. But they are all problems that came from a previous problem, something that existed before. And so when we understand these 5 points, we'll begin to understand what the bigger problem is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَاللَّهُ أَخْرَجَكُم مِّن بُطُونِ أُمَّهَاتِكُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ شَيْئًا وَجَعَلَ لَكُمُ السَّمْعَ وَالْأَبْصَارَ وَالْأَفْئِدَةَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. That we created the human being from the stomach of their mother, and the human being did not know anything, and we provided for the human being hearing, seeing, and a heart, so that the human being will be grateful. The first step, the human being knows nothing. If you take all of the creatures of the world, every single creature, every other creature other than the human being already knows what it needs to know by its birth, 95%. The human being is the only creature that's the opposite. We only know 5%. It takes our parents, it takes our schools, it takes our masajid, it takes all of these things to educate a child. As for the animal, it's the opposite. The animal is born knowing. The animal knows how to hunt. The animal knows how to eat. Only 5% is taught by its parents. And I'll give you an example. Take the animal that is a cat. If you put a cat which is 1 year old on the roof, and you put a 1-year-old child on the roof, the reality is the cat will go to the edge of the roof and will move back because it has that instinct naturally to fear. As for the child, unless somebody grabs the child and takes them away from the edge, the child will fall. Why? Because the child needs to be educated. It needs to be taught. And so the first point is that the human being is created knowing nothing. And this is proven from the Quran and from reality. Now, the second thing is to understand the phase of the youth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, Allahu alladhi khalaqakum min ضعف ثم جعل من بعد ضعف قوة ثم جعل من بعد قوة ضعفا وشيبة. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that we created you from weakness. We made you a baby. We made you a toddler. We made you a child. And then we put a middle period in which you would have strength. And in that period of strength, you would work and you would do all of the things that you need to do. And then you'd come to the last phase and you'd be old and you'd be elderly and you'd be weak again. What phase is being talked about in the middle? That's the phase of the youth. How does Allah describe the phase of the youth? He describes the phase of the youth as a phase of strength, as a phase of power, as a phase of harakah, as a phase of doing. That a young man or woman should know that the period of strength that they have is a period and time to accomplish great things. And that in that tender age of youth, they will not be able to do the things that they could not do when they were a child, and that they will not be able to do when they're adults and too old to do it. But unfortunately, when we see a 15, 16-year-old person, we say, oh, that's a kid. That's somebody that can't do anything. But yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes that 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old person as a person of strength, a person that can accomplish a lot of things. But unfortunately, we tell them that they're a baby, that they don't need to do anything, that they can just sit and they can relax. This is the first trait of a young person, that they have strength. The second trait is that a young person believes in their own istiqlal. They believe that they are independent of their parents, not financially independent of their parents, but they believe that they have reached an age where they are intellectually independent of their parents. They think they know better. They think they understand better. They think they've studied more. And perhaps sometimes it is the case, and perhaps it is not the case. But at this point, the young 14, 15, 16-year-old boy or girl believes in themselves and does not want to submit to anybody else's rules, especially if there is no reasoning given for those rules, especially if there is no dialogue given. A child came to one of our imams back home in St. Louis, and he asked him that, Sheikh, can you prove to me the existence of God? And the Sheikh said, look at the stars and look at the moons. Do you think that child is convinced? Of course not. This child, this 14, 15, 16-year-old boy or girl whose mind is developing, who believes he's independent or she is independent in thinking, will not be convinced by an answer like this. But in fact, they will run away. They will run away. Let me give you a story. And this story, whether it is true or not, is irrelevant. But it's a story that has some sort of benefit and some sort of understanding that we can take for us. There was a father who had a dream. And in this dream, he saw 3 books. One big-sized book, one middle-sized book, and one really small-sized book. The big-sized book was lit on fire. The middle-sized book was lit on fire. And the small-sized book was lit on fire on the sides, but the father was able to put water around it and it didn't burn completely. This man, he saw in this dream and he went to one of the scholars to ask for ta'bid, to ask for an interpretation of the dream. The scholar, he responded and he said, I don't know, go to such and such person. And so he went to such and such person, and the person said that if I am not wrong, then your dream means the following. The first thing is that the biggest book, that was your eldest child, you failed with your eldest child. Then the middle one was your middle child, you also failed. But your youngest child, you passed with, and you were able to save. Who were these children? These were his 3 daughters. These were his 3 daughters. And we know that the father is always attached to which daughter? Always the youngest one. And so with the youngest one, every time she asked, Baba, why do I have to wear hijab? Baba, why do I have to uphold modesty? Baba, why do I have to pray salah? He would answer her questions. As for the first one and the second one, he said that you just have to do it because I said so. And then he also put them in the wrong schools and so on and so forth. And this was the reason. What was the key? That he would have conversations with the youngest one, that which he never had with the oldest and the middle one. And that was one of the lessons. And so you have to have a conversation. You have to allow them to intellectually engage with you. And if you haven't done it up until now, you have to figure out how to do it. Today, young girls, they don't go to their mothers for help. Young boys, they don't go to their fathers for help. Where do they go? They go to the internet. Because why? When they go to their mother and father says, don't say this, astaghfirullah. They say, oh, you're going to get away from Allah. They reprimand them for asking any questions. If you go to Mecca today, the most sold book in Mecca today is a book by Richard Dawkins, which denies the existence of God. This is in Mecca. Why is this being read? It's because parents over there, scholars over there are not engaging the youth. They're not talking to them about atheism. They're not talking about how we defend our beliefs. And therefore, because they're not having the conversation, the only conversation that they can have is with a book that tells them to disbelieve. And that's how they start. And so parents, they have 3 methods of having a conversation with their kid. They have ijbar, which is force. They say, you have to do this. If you don't do this, I'll take away this and this and this and that. This is number 1. The second one is ighra, which is bribing your child by saying that if you do this, I'll give you $5. If you do this, I'll buy you this game. If you do this, I'll do that. Right? And the scholars, they say, as for ijbar, forcing your child, لا يكون دائما ولا أكثرية. This does not work forever. It ends up stopping. What does that mean? It means that if you force your kid today when they're 18 or 19 and they're out of your control, they'll do whatever they want. As for ighra, as for bribing your child with sweets and gifts and all of these different things, this will only last up until the time you continue to give it to them. When you stop giving it to them, they'll act out. They'll have a tantrum, like a lot of the little kids do in their houses when you pull away their iPads. The only thing that works is actually trying to convince them, actually trying to do what we call iqna, convincing them, having a conversation with them about why the things that they're doing is important. And it's not one conversation, it's continuous. When you have kids memorizing the Quran, the job of the teacher of the Quran is not to tell them the virtue of memorizing the Quran one time, but to continuously tell them 2-3 years straight, so that when they hit 17, 18, 19, they understand why they memorized the Quran in the first place. If a girl stops wearing hijab, how will you have the conversation with her? How will you talk to her? These are the things that we have to ask ourselves. A lot of times when somebody says that I'm not going to do this, Baba, I'm not going to do this, Mama, we say that if you don't do it, you're going to go to Jahannam. That's not the right way. Nobody's going to become convinced by that. Your kids, they're facing something very difficult. They're facing America. In America, there are 3 phases to every sin that happens from every single child, from every single adult in this country. The first is what we call suwar habita. They see images and pictures on their TV, on their social media, on their phones, and so on and so forth, which cause them to think about the bad things. They see illicit relationships, they see drinking, they see drugs, they see all of this stuff on TV and on their phones first. Then what happens? They begin to think about it. They begin to reflect on it. They try to figure out, how can I get away with this without my parents noticing, if their parents care? And then finally they fall into that sin. They fall into that sin. But the sin isn't the problem. It's how they got there in the first place. Why are we giving our kids phones at the age of 11 years old? They don't need it. Where are they going? They're staying in their house. They're going to school. The teacher has a phone. Right? And so we have to ask, how did our kids get there in the first place? Then we ask, how do we fix it? Right? So let me give you a way to fix it. Number 1, if your kid is spending time in the masjid, your kid is spending time with other students, your kid is spending time with other Muslims, your kid is spending time listening to the sheikh, your kid is spending time playing productive sports like soccer, basketball, with a mentor and coach, and so on and so forth, and that they're in scholastic programs, this will uplift the thinking of your child. Just like there were bad images, there are also good images that enter the mind of a child. And if there are good images, the end result are good actions. If you never talk to your child about serving people in the masjid, they will never serve people in the masjid. Right? And that's the difference between the Sahaba and us, that we connect our kids to the phones, they connected their kids to the masjid. And this is not theoretical speech. This is reality. This is stuff that we have to do. My niece, before she was born, my sister-in-law, she used to read books to my niece. She used to read books to my niece. And my niece, by the time she was 2 years old, she was already reading full-on books. And I'm not trying to praise her for any means or for any reason, but I'm trying to give you a point. One day I was sitting with her and she saw my belly is sticking out as it is right now. And she goes to me and she says, "Chachu, you're obese." Which 2-year-old knows the word obese, which means fat? And then when she was 3 or 4, I like to annoy little kids. She comes up to me and she says that you're frustrating me. Which 3 or 4-year-old knows the word frustrating? What is the reason? Because her mother would read to her. Her mother would talk to her. Her mother would spend that time. The father would spend that time. Build that intellectual connection with your child. Don't say that I made them born and that's it. I provide for them and I put clothes on and that's it. I send them to school and that's it. No. Talk to your kids. Have a conversation. I know of a woman back home that before she had children, she read over 200 books on the psychology of children alone. 200 books on the psychology of children alone. Today, her daughter has read over 600 books by the time she's 18. Why? Because the mother knew how to raise her child. You have to study, you have to learn, you have to put in the effort to know these things. We need programs in our masajid. We don't just need prayer and salah. We do that. We need programs, we need books, we need libraries, we need discussions. We need even play places for our kids. Our kids, when they come up to an adult and the adult tells them the right thing and says that, son, that you have to pray. But then when the kid says, why do I have to pray, Ammu? The Ammu doesn't know the answer. The Ammu gives a weak answer. When the girl says that, Mama, why do I have to wear hijab? Oh, because it's this and this and that. The girl doesn't feel convinced. This is why we have to spend the time learning how to talk to our kids. That most of their education comes from their phones and from the internet and from their friends. But only 1% comes from the sheikh and their parents. And this is what you're battling with. And this is why 7 people are going to be under the shade of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one of those is a youth that spends time in the masjid. Why? Because that youth, getting that youth to the masjid is the real effort of all of the parents. It's the real effort of all of the community members. This is what we're supposed to do. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to understanding our young kids. These topics, they take a lot of time and they take a lot of understanding. But there's something that we need to spend time talking about, discussing. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروا إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله على إحسانه والشكر له على توفيقه وامتنانه وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد يقول الله تبارك وتعالى إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. I'm just going to mention a few points and then we'll finish up. When I started 2 years ago, one of the objectives and one of the goals that I had was to make the masjid a place for the youth, and was to make the masjid a place for young kids to have fun, to pray, and to do all of the things that they want to. And one of the goals that I had was to build a gym. One of the goals was to fix that soccer field in the back that's not leveled. I had all of these aspirations. And I'm going to tell you something, that I did my part. I did my part by Allah. That I used to have 40 to 60 kids in my halaqah every week. But every time the halaqah finished, they asked, Sheikh, what are we going to do now? Is there anything for us to do? Is there a foosball table for us to play in? Is there ice hockey? Is there a proper soccer field? Is there a proper basketball court? And what was my answer? Nothing. I had no answer. And I don't blame these kids. I blame every single community member. And you can take it the way that you want to take it. I'm leaving after 2 weeks. But it's the responsibility of every single person sitting in this room, that these kids need to have an environment of play and pray, not just salah. Because if you just say salah, 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 you will find that when your kids turn 26 or 27, they'll run to Atlanta and they'll run to Charlotte, not because of the reason that you think, not because they're running for a job. Because a job you can always find everywhere, but they'll run because they'll find communities where they can raise their kids and get the things that they were missing here. You don't like what I'm saying? Then it's your problem. So number 1, environment and play. Number 2 is that we need to start creating community role models. It doesn't have to be a sheikh. It can be somebody who's 30, 35, a young man, a young woman. Take up the job as a college student. Advise and mentor the younger students. If you're good at something, say, how can I serve in the community? Become a role model for young people. Number three, we need to start having Islamic programs. The Imam of Augusta, he just left last year and he went to Austin. In Augusta, that masjid is dying without him. In Austin today, there are 48 programs that happen for all of the ages. Where are our programs in the masjid for adult men, adult women, for youth, for toddlers? What are we doing? We just have a building that we pray Jumu'ah in. Number 4, this is one of the most important things, and the last point, which is that we need to start doing ihsan towards people. Start feeding people. You want people to come to the masjid, there has to be food. There has to be drink. There has to be snacks for the kids. There has to be these things. Take the wisdom of the Arabs. What did they say? أَحْسِنْ إِلَى النَّاسِ تَسْتَعْبِدْ قُلُوبَهُم. That be nice to the people. Be kind to them. Feed them. Provide them pizza. Provide them these things. Provide them food. And you will have their hearts. فَطَالَمَا إِسْتَعْبَدَ الْإِنسَانِ إِحْسَانُ. As long as you show this ihsan to people, you will always have their hearts. These are 4 things. Number 1, creating the environment of pray and play. Number 2 is, if you're a young person, if you're an older person, become a role model for those that are under you. Number 3 is start investing in programs for the masjid. And number 4 is that don't be cheap. Don't count pennies when it comes to feeding the people. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to unite our communities. If I offended anybody, that was not my goal. But my goal was to remind us for the things that actually matter in life. اللهم لا تدع لنا في مقامنا هذا ذنبا إلا غفرته ولا هما إلا فرجته ولا دينا إلا قضيته ولا مريضا إلا شفيته ولا ضالا إلا هديته يا رب العالمين. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. فاذكروا الله يذكركم واشكروه على نعمه يزدكم. أقيموا الصلاة.